Hi, I just wanted to do a quick screencast explaining one of my latest gems, which is called 2QB XML. And what it does here is it takes a Ruby hash and turns it into a QuickBooks XML request. Intuit is now requiring that new integration projects use at least new integration projects with QuickBooks Desktop use what's called the QB SDK. And one of the methods of communicating with the SDK is with something called a QuickBooks Web Connector. That's a little bit beyond this screencast, but that uses QuickBooks XML. So here is a library that I made. It's more lightweight than probably the most popular library currently, which is the QB XML library. In this library, it simply will create your QB XML request with a hash. Now, so does the other one, but there's some key differences between the two libraries. One of them is that I never found a good way to do repeatable nodes in the QB XML library. I just could not figure it out. I'm sure it does it, but of course, when you're making a hash, what I'm talking about is things like this right here. Invoice line add, invoice line add. These are repeatable nodes under a parent of invoice add. Now in a hash, we know that they're going to overwrite each other, and that can't work. So I came up with a method of using you can make them repeat if you put them inside of an array, but the problem is that the key of the hash would be like line, line, line going down, and they would overwrite each other. Now there's a way to preserve keys in Ruby 1.9. I didn't like that solution either, and I think a simpler solution is just to come up with a uniform key that will repeat an array of hashes. All right, so that's what I did. I came up, if you use the repeat key, which doesn't conflict with any QB XML nodes, and you put a array in there of keys, like line. In this case, it's line. I was giving the example of invoice line add, but that's actually here in this hash. That's where the invoice line add. And here's a function called line item. Here it has the key invoice line add, and that's what I showed you there is what I'm looking to repeat. I'm looking to repeat these guys. Here's one up here. Here's another one. Again, they're under a parent. And so here in the hash, I did a repeat key, so it's sort of the parent key, and then we have an array of these guys. Okay, and so the first argument, or to initialize the class, we put in this hash, and I refer to it as like a body hash, because this will be like the body. This is going to be like the boilerplate stuff here. So you would just put in the body hash. Then there's a method called make, which you're mostly going to want to use, where you're going to make the particular QB XML request. Okay, let me go down and give some commentary on some of the things. Okay, there's some notes on the repeating nodes. All right, now a mod request into the make method, you would do action mod. That's going to change these. You need to have these little mods here. You need to have them there as well, where they were adds in the previous request. In making a query request, this is going to be action query. Now, also in MyGem, it's a lot easier to make different versions from the QB XML gem. So you may want to do use a certain version of QB XML. You can do that easily. You can pass a list of options here. I'll go over all the options that go into the second argument of the initialization, and there's quite a bit of features there as well. Okay, now you can also see in this query request, we can deeply nest and make really rich queries. So here I was able to put in this modified date range filter using the from modified date to modified date, which is actually very useful. I use that in a real world client project. So you can even nest down even further, which I do believe in a QB XML request, query request, you can go down even a little further in some of the more advanced queries. Here's an example of an iterator query request. And now, what I'm doing here too, I mentioned that there's some more arguments that go in to this second argument of the initialization. One of them is document true. This will return a Nokogiri document back instead of the XML. Now also here there's a third argument, and these are options which will go into making the specific QB XML request. Now in this case, there's a hash with the key of adders, which takes a hash, and that will do attributes right here, which are very important. It's mostly for iterator requests, but you can pump them into the query request here, and that's what this is for this third argument. There's also some other arguments that can go into here. Now, it's important to remember when you're putting in these these attribute hash, to use good old-fashioned strings with the right camel case. Now above, you may notice that I used all snake case, and then it came out as this nice title case that QB XML uses. I forgot to mention that, but that's very important. That's something that the library does as well. It will convert your camel case into the proper title case QB XML. And in some cases, it's kind of strange because like list ID doesn't have a lowercase ID, has an uppercase ID, but you can just put the lowercase snake case, and this library knows those edge cases of what to capitalize and what not to. You can see that these are just item ref. The ref here is lowercase. So let me go back to this. But with these attributes, don't do that. Don't put these in snake case. Leave these in the proper title case, I guess we call it, or the camel case that QB XML uses. Okay, now I talk a little bit more here about the initialize method and the make method, and as you can recall, both of these take some optional arguments. So by looking at these at the method in the actual source code, it'll give you an idea of how many things you can actually pass into there. In the same way for the make method, besides the adders hash, what else you can pass in there. And I think what's most important is to take a look at the specs. The specs are going to give you some ideas of exactly how some of the code is going to look like and what it produces. In all of these cases, you can put a puts XML right there, and you can get the full XML. And I have a good amount of tests in here, so you can get some different scenarios. And so I highly recommend that. Okay. Now, one difference too in this library, I mentioned it's lightweight. What about validation? The QB XML library has quite a bit of validation. I didn't find that validation very good. I was getting some errors with it. It may be fine. I didn't give it a lot of airtime. But in my experience in real world client projects, it is really best to use the OCR docs. They are going to have explanations, and you do need to remember to have the nodes in the right order. There's also a QB XML validator tool and SDK test utilities. These come with, here I say, the standard QB XML installation. And you're going to really want to use them if you're doing a project of any kind of scope. You can... So I think I cut out any sort of validation to keep this short because you want to use those other tools to do that. Now, also in the QB XML library is parsing out, and it has an ability to turn the XML you're getting back, the QB XML you're getting back, turning it into a Ruby hash. Now, I don't really like that either because there's some issues with finding, and you want to really be able to deeply search and parse the QB XML. And I think the best way to do that is no-cogiri. And so that's a little opinion there. So I cut that out as well. I don't think you need that. I think this is going to give you exactly what you need here. I just have a little example, and in all the specs I have examples of using no-cogiri to do the parsing, so I highly recommend that. Okay, so I hope you enjoy this. If you're doing an integration project, I really hope the force is with you because it's quite difficult. Now I hope to have another library as well which deals with interacting with the QBWC, which is also, I think, a different approach than the current library that's out there. So thanks for watching, and please submit any pull requests as well.